What's cruising? My name is Celery from Imperfect Cleavage, and today I'll be going over my Stamina Necromancer build for Dragonhold. Alright, to begin with, we're going to go through the character sheet. First things first, race. I'm a Dark Elf. You could be an Orc, which is best in slot right now. You could be Khajiit. You could be any of the Stamina races, sorry. You just have to be careful about the health bonuses that you get from them. If you're an Orc, you don't need anything to your attributes here. See, I have 20 into health because I'm a Dark Elf and I don't get any bonuses for health. So if you're a Red Guard, for example, and you're not getting any health bonuses from your racial passives, put 20 into health, 44 into stam. Otherwise, if you do get health bonuses, put it all into stamina. Mundus, the Shadow, always the Shadow. Food, Lavafoot soup and sultries, and you have to be a vampire. The drain this patch is really bad, so if you're not a vampire, you're going to struggle to sustain. So it's really important that you have stage 2 vampirism. Into the gear, I'll be showing you guys my 2H setup first of all, and once I've gone through all of the skills and all of the gear, I will show you guys variations of this build for dual wield, etc, etc. So, to begin with, the optimal setup is Krag's monster set, perfect Reliquant on the body, perfect Locustes jewelry with a perfect Loc battle axe, and a Maelstrom bow. For the traits, doesn't matter what gear set you use, the traits will always be the same, and same with the enchants. You want all stamina enchants on the body pieces, all divines. On the jewelry, you want 3 weapon damage enchants, all bloodthirsty. Your front bar 2H needs to be precise. The enchant doesn't matter because you'll be using double dot poisons, which I'll explain how to make in a second. And you want an infused berserker enchant for your bow. Just some other gear that you could use if you don't have these sets. Kraz is really easy to get. This should not be a problem. It comes from Vet Fungal Grotto one. Not a big deal to get. Reliquant though. You don't have to use Perfect Reliquant. Non-Perfect Reliquant is probably the second best stamina set in the game. So if you can get your hands in it, go and pug some NCR. It's really not difficult to get. If you don't have it and you want to get started now, use something like Hunding's Rage on the body. Or Spriggan's if you're lower CP, because it's better than nothing, honestly. For your jewelry, so your front bar weapon set, what you could use and what I would recommend instead of Locustes if you don't have it, or non-perfect Locustes, is that you use Briarheart. The thing about the Necromancer is that when you get to execute, its passives kick in, and the passives give you 10% extra critical for each ability that you have slotted from the Grave Lord skill line, I'm pretty sure. The problem is that with sets like Advancing Yokita and Zogvin, generally what tends to happen is you'll start to overcrit and execute. So you're basically doing 5% extra critical, 5% extra crit rate, which really doesn't do anything for you, and it's kind of wasted. So in place of it, I would recommend Briarheart fully, because it gives you a lot of weapon damage, gives you a bit of crit too, which is really nice. For your back bar, if you don't have the Maelstrom's bow, that's fine. I would not recommend using the Master's bow, even if you have it, simply because you're not using poison injection for the vast majority of your pass. What you can use instead is you could use a Briarheart bow in place, or whatever set to match your 5-piece on the front bar, or you could use a bow of agility. Generally speaking, the most important thing to be concerned about is that you have the Berserker enchant and it's infused. Okay, so going into skills. Front bar is Barb Trap under Fighters Guild, Wrecking Blow under 2H, Detonating Siphon under Gravelord, Executioner under 2H, Blast Bones, Blighted Blast Bones, Blighted Blast Bones under Gravelord, and Pestilent Colossus. And for your back bar, you have any Fighter's Guild ability, honestly. It doesn't matter. You could put 2 traps on if you really wanted to, but I just have Ring Preservation. Skeletal Archer under Gravelord, Death Siphon again, Poison Injection from Bow, Endless Hail from Bow, and Pestilent Colossus from Bow. Going over these skills quickly, the point of Barb Trap is for Minor Force, really strong buff. It increases your crit damage. Wrecking Blow, which is going to be your spammable, is really strong and it empowers your light attacks. Debt Siphon, which is a really nice off cooldown ability, which does a lot of damage. Executioner, which is going to be your execute, super strong. Blighted Blast Bones, which is another really strong ability, but it's kind of an intermittent ability that you use because it's got a it's effectively got a 3-second cooldown because once you summon Blast Bones, it takes a little bit to run at whatever it is you're targeting. And for our ultimate, the Pestilent Colossus, this is the $40 debuff. Basically, what it does is it does a lot of damage, but the big part is that you can see on the tooltip it applies major vulnerability, and that increased damage by 30% from all sources is absolutely broken. So it's really important to have this ability. On your back bar, yeah, Fighter's Guild, whatever. Skeletal Archer. The thing about Skeletal Archer is it does a lot of damage. Basically, it's there just for the damage, honestly. Debt Siphon again, just because it gives you passive 3% increase to your damage. Poison Injection. Now this ability is really lacking this patch because it got nerfed so hard, but during Execute, it does do a decent amount of damage. So when I come to the rotation, you'll see how it's used. And Endless Hail is, again, just a strong dot, and it procs your Crusher, not your Crusher chance, sorry, your Berserker. And it's really important to keep that up, to keep up that weapon damage bonus. And then, again, back bar, just Colossus. Quickly going over the passives for each of these skill lines that you need. Under Gravelord, you need all of them. So reusable parts, it's going to reduce the cost of your Blast Bones and Archer, which is really nice. Death Knell. Now this is a really important passive, and it's kind of something that you have to work around with your build if you're using sets that increase your crit by a lot, like Leviathan or Yokator. So what it's going to do is when an enemy is in execute, depending on how many Gravelord abilities you have slotted, it's going to increase your crit chance by 10%. So for example, sitting outside of execute, this build's crit rate is 61%. So in Execute, because I have 3 Gravelord abilities slotted, it's going to go up to 91%. And if I were to slot one more, I would be over 100, which is not good. We need Dismember. This is a really important passive. It allows us to play around with our traits and our CP. Basically what it does, it just gives you more pen while you have a Gravelord ability active. And that could be either Debt Siphon or Skeletal Archer. Doesn't matter which. And Rapid Rot, that's just a 15% flat bonus to dot damage. It's broken. Under Bone Tyrant, you don't necessarily need Death Gleaning, but it's really nice to have because whenever something dies, you just restore Stam and Mag. Last Gasp under Bone Tyrant is actually super important though because it's going to increase your max health by 1250. And it's because of this passive that we can run the food that we're running, Lava Foot, Soup, and Saltries, because that doesn't give you any extra health. It's only going to give you Stam and Regen, which we really need on the Stamina Necromancer. Under Living Death, none of it is necessarily, Curative Curse is not necessary, but it's nice to have, because it just increases the amount of healing you're going to receive, and, the healing that you're going to do when you've got a negative effect on you. The two important ones under this tree, however, are Corpse Consumption and Undead. So Corpse Consumption is going to give you ult every time. It's going to give you 10 ult when you use an ability on a corpse. And the ability that we're going to be using on a corpse is Debt Siphon. So basically, whenever we use Debt Siphon, it's going to generate 10 ult, and it's going to get us that little bit closer to Colossus again. And then lastly, this passive is really important for us to sustain. Basically, when you've got Archer active, your Stam recovery is going to be increased by 200, which is a lot once you get buffed by minor and major endurance. Going into weapons, for two-handed, you want all the passives. Basically, what they do is they just add a lot of cleave and they add a lot of sustain. The only one that is 100% necessary is heavy weapons, because what this is going to do is it's going to put a sort of passive bleed on your battle axe. So when you attack something, you've got a 16% chance to apply a bleed for them for 6 seconds. That tooltip there of 1200 246 is going to change depending on your CP and other things, but as long as you have this passive, all all the others are sort of whatever and just kind of affect your sustain. Apart from Forceful, which increases your cleave with light attacks, which is fine, but if we're talking strictly single target, heavy weapons is the most important. I would definitely recommend getting Balanced Blade though, because otherwise you're going to have some problems with sustain. Under Bow, we just want all of them. They're all really good. The only one that's not completely necessary is Hasty Retreat. All it's going to do is give you Major Expedition when you roll dodge with your bow out, which is helpful at times, but not necessary. Under Armor, you want everything under Medium Armor. Everything else is unnecessary. Don't need it. Under Soul Magic, you want Consuming Trap. That's just something that is useful for your sustain, depending on your fight. If you're struggling in a fight that has a lot of adds and you need to like really spam out some high cost abilities, just chucking a Consuming Trap on any which other enemy really helps. So under Vampire, you want Supernatural Recovery. Everything else here is really not necessary. It's all just if you want it, if you've got the skill points. But this is extremely important because this is where you're going to get 10% extra mag and stam recovery, which, like every other passive, is super important for making sure you're able to sustain. Under Guild, you want all your fighters guild, apart from Bounty Hunter. That's not necessary. Slayer and Banish the Wicked are extremely important though, because Slayer is going to give you increased weapon damage by 3% for each fighter's guild ability slotted. It's just free damage. And Banish the Wicked is going to give you 9 ult whenever you kill Undead, Daedra, or Werewolf once you've got it maxed out 3 out of 3. And it's really important because we want to generate this bad boy as quickly as possible. Under Undaunted, the passives you need are Undaunted Command and Undaunted Metal. Basically, Metal is going to increase your max stats, which translates to better survivability and better damage. And Undaunted Command, which is just going to improve your sustain by a lot. Under Assault, you only really want Resolving Vigor. But that's kind of a general survivability thing. If you feel you can survive without it, go ahead. But I would recommend you get it. Under Racial Passives, I'm a Dark Elf, so I have all my passives. It should be the same for any other race. Just make sure you have all your passives. It's worth it, by far. Under Craft, the one tree that you have to have leveled and have points into is Alchemy. And that's because of this passive here, Medicinal Use. So what Medicinal Use is going to do is going to increase the duration on the buffs that you get from your pots. And for this build, we're going to be using Essence of Weapon Power. So what this is going to do is it's going to give you Major Brutality, Major Savagery, and it's going to give you Major Endurance and Stand Back. All of these are super important for your damage and sustain. But now that we're on the topic of potions, I'll go and quickly show you guys how to make the poisons in the potions. If I have the right ingredients, that is. So, to make the potions that you need Blessed Thistle, Dragon Thorn, and Wormwood. You could use Water Hyacinth. It's going to do the same thing as Wormwood, but the thing about Water Hyacinth is it's used for spell power pots as well, which are more valuable. So, I just use Wormwood, personally. So, that's for the Essence of Weapon Power pots, and for the poison, what you need is Fleshfly Lava, Nightshade, and Nernroot. That's going to give you your double dots. Super important. Just going over CP quickly. Under Blue, you want 40 into Tharm, 72 into Precise Strikes, 33 into Piercing, 64 into Mighty. And then under the Atronach, you want 61 Master at Arms, and that should cap you out on your CP points. You don't need anything into the Apprentice or anything. Under the green trees, the only one that's super important is that you get as much into Mooncalf as possible until you can get it to 100. After that, you can put it into Tenacity, you can put it into Tumbling, you can put it into Bashing Focus. I've got 100 into it because I Bash Weave on dual wield, but I'll come to that. You can put in the Ward, anything you like, it's all to taste, as long as you have 100 into Mooncalf. Red CP doesn't matter because that's going to change depending on your trial. So, time to demonstrate the rotation. Now the rotation for the Necromancer this patch is extremely simple. It has some variations that add a slight amount of complexity to it and will increase your damage, but they're really not necessary to pull big damage. So the basic principle of the rotation is that you're casting Blast Bones, and then you're casting 2 abilities before you cast Blast Bones again, like that. So to begin with, you would summon your Archer, and you would cast Hail. And you would Blast Bones, 2 abilities. Make sure you use Trap to keep up Minor Force. And then you would just Blast Bones, Wrecking Blow. Until your backbar dots run out, and then you just chuck them down again. In terms of Trap and Colossus usage, you want to use them in place of 1 Wrecking Blow spam when they go down. So, for example, say if Trap's down, then my rotation after Blast Bones would be Blast Bones, Trap, Wrecking Blow, Blast Bones, carry on with Wrecking Blow. Same thing goes for Colossus. If I want to cast Colossus, then it would be Blast Bones, Colossus, more spam, etc, etc. There's nothing to say that you necessarily have to use Wrecking Blow after you use Blast Bones. It's more so that you use skills that you need to use or re-up after you've used Blast Bones. And if you can... So generally, the dynamic rotation... The principle behind the dynamic rotation is that you just use 2 abilities between Blast Bones. And that pretty much carries on until you get to Execute. But in terms of a static rotation, which is really easy to learn for beginners, it's really simple. Basically, it's just Archer, Hail, then it's Blast Bones, Trap, Wrecking Blow, Blast Bones, Wrecking Blow, Wrecking Blow, Blast Bones, Wrecking Blow, Wrecking Blow, Blast Bones, Wrecking Blow, Wrecking Blow, Swap, Hail, Archer, repeat forever. So basically, it's just Hail, Archer, Blast Bones, Trap, Wrecking Blow, and then you repeat Blast Bones, Wrecking Blow 3 more times after that, and then swap back to your back bar to re-up your abilities. Hail and Archer. So that's going to lead on to how to use Debt Siphon. Actually, you know what? I should probably mention Execute first. So with this 2H setup specifically, what will happen in Execute with this fully static rotation is all you're going to do is that once you hit 37%, you're just going to swap out Wrecking Blow for Executioner. So it would just end up being Blast Bones, Executioner, Executioner, Blast Bones, Executioner, Executioner, Blast Bones, Executioner, etc, etc, until it's dead. But yeah, that's going to lead on to Debt Siphon usage. So the thing about Debt Siphon is it's an ability that doesn't have a global cooldown, and by that I mean you can use it at the same time as another ability. The weird thing about it though is that you have to have a corpse on the ground, and you can't use it while channeling an ability. And because our spammable is channeled, the only times you can use it if you're spamming is if you use it right before you press Wrecking Blow, or at the very end of the Wrecking Blow animation. So generally speaking, the easiest thing to do to cast Debt Siphon would just be to cast it as you cast Blast Bones, like that. So it would be Blast Bones, Wrecking Blow, Blast Bones, Debt Siphon. The thing about Debt Siphon is that it doesn't really line up with any of your dots, but the fact that it is off cooldown means you can just cast it whenever. So it doesn't really matter when you cast it as long as you can kind of keep it up. But if you want to up Debt Siphon during Wrecking Blow, then you would have to do it after Wrecking Blow or before Wrecking Blow. If I can just get another corpse quickly. Like that. Kind of wonky. It's hard to get used to, but all you got to really remember is that it's an ability that you can cast with another ability. So you're not going to lose a cooldown by casting Debt Siphon. Apart from that, it's really simple rotation. So probably like one tier up, rotation wise, in difficulty, is that what we do is we follow the same sort of static, hail, archer, blast bones, trap, wrecking blow, spam 4 times. And then once we get to 37%, we swap from wrecking blow to executioner again. And then, but once we get to 25%, it changes again. So at 25%, it's going to be a fully dynamic rotation. So what will happen is at 25%, if you don't necessarily have to do this, mind you, but if you want to maximize your damage and execute, this is the best way to do it. So in execute, what will happen is you drop your static rotation completely in favor of something completely different. All you're doing in execute at 25% with this variation is that you're putting down trap, hail, poison injection, and archer. And then you're just executioner spamming until one of them runs out, like poison injection right here. So you're just executioner spamming until your dots run out. And you just re-up your dots. So really simple variation for execute, but it increases your damage by a lot. And it's just that until the thing's dead. Pretty easy. In terms of fully dynamic rotation, the sort of general principle of when you change your spammable and when you change into full execute mode stays the same. But what you'll be doing is you'll be re-upping your dots. Re-upping your dots as they need to be re-upped between blast bone spam, like I mentioned earlier. But to demonstrate, it would look something like this. So I'm just spamming when I don't need to re-up dots. Hail's about to drop. Hail's dropped, so I'm going to swap to my back bar, re-up it, come back, blast bones again. Archer's dropped, I'm going to come back to my back bar, re-up it, continue spamming blast bones, put down trap because it's off. And you just continue on like that, swapping to your back bar whenever you need to re-up one of your dots, putting down trap whenever you need to re-up one of your dots. Compared to something like a Nightblade, this dynamic rotation variation is extremely simple. It's something that if you put a little bit of time into and get really good at, you can get really good results. But that being said, the amount of DPS increase you're going to experience is not gonna be crazy different from just the full static and then just a full dynamic execute. But like I said, if there's something you want to do, by all means. Okay, so now that I've gone through character sheet, skills, abilities, I'm going to go through some variations of this build. So the first variation would be the dual wield equivalent of this build. So for dual wield, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be swapping out our monster set in favor of Masterlock, ideally. The reason being is that we're going to have a sharpened offhand weapon, which I'll show you in a second. But we then have the luxury of using something like Masterlock, which is the strongest single target. It's probably the strongest AoE monster set for stamina as well in the game right now. So we're going to be using Masterlock. If you don't have it, you can use Veladreth or Selene's or Stormfist if your sustain is really bad. Any of those work pretty damn well. In terms of weapons, we're going to be having a known-honed main hand weapon, and we're going to be having a sharpened offhand weapon. And you got to make sure that you have an axe and a dagger. Doesn't matter which hand which is in, but you have to make sure that the known-honed is on the main hand and the sharpened is on the offhand. Yeah. So as long as you do that, you don't have to adjust any of your CP whenever you switch between 2H and dual wield. The only reason I wouldn't personally use dual wield to begin with when you're starting off is that dual wield, the sustain on it is 10 times worse than 2H. So if you just want to get a hang, if you just want to get the hang of Necromancer, if you're beginning, I highly recommend you use 2H. But if you want to use dual wield, that's fine. You just have to be a little bit more careful about your sustain, and there's some ways to kind of get around that I'll show you in a second. So, skills wise, it's going to be slightly different with our spam ball. We're not going to be using the weapon skill line spam ball. We're going to be using Venom Skull instead, which is under Gravelord. And so the thing about Venom Skull is it's this ranged spam ball like that. Really easy to use. It does get kind of funny to weave sometimes, so you got to be careful about that. But yeah, back to the skills. The only other difference is that we're going to be using Flawless Dawnbreaker on our front bar instead of Pestilent Colossus. The reason we're doing this is because now that we've slotted an extra Gravelord ability in our slot, we're going to be getting an extra 10% from Death Knell. And to kind of get around the fact that we've got too much crit now, we just swap it out for Flawless Dawnbreaker, which is just an extra 3% weapon damage from your fire skill passive. In terms of your execute, we're replacing Executioner with Whirling Blades, the point of which is that it's an execute. But the thing about Whirling Blades is it's extremely expensive cost-wise. So you might end up, even in a really well sort of optimized group, you might find yourself having to heavy attack during fights just to be able to keep up the stamina while you spam Whirling Blades and execute. In terms of passives, you want literally all of them because they're all extremely important. All of them just increase your damage straight up. It's not like 2H where a lot of them increase your sustain. Dual Wield's passives focus namely on damage. And if you're asking the question now, which is going to pull more, 2H or Dual Wield is more damage in theory, but the sustain is 10 times worse. So the only times I would really recommend using Dual Wield is in a really optimized group where you can sustain well and you actually need the extra damage and the extra AoE that you get from Dual Wield. So yeah, one way to mitigate the amount of sustain problems that you're going to experience is by using the Consuming Trap skill under Soul Magic. The beautiful thing about this ability in particular is that when you cast it on something and that thing dies, you're going to be restoring a lot of resources. So for example, on Locustes, during flight phase where you get a lot of Storm Atronachs and you have to cleave them all down, what you would be doing on this build is you'd be spamming Whirling Blades. And like I mentioned, it's really costly. So a good thing to do is just to whack Consuming Trap on in place of Debt Siphon on your back bar and just cast it on Atronachs as they're about to die. And if you do that, it's just a free 6,000 stamina. And that honestly helps so much for your sustain. It is really, really invaluable. But yeah, so if you're struggling with sustain, you can use Stormfist instead of Masterlock, but it's not optimal damage-wise. But if you're really struggling, those are just a couple things that you can do to sort of mitigate that. In terms of sets that you could run instead of Locustes Dual Wield, it's exactly the same as 2H. You would just run Briarheart Dual Wield, which is much more expensive, mind you. So keep that in mind. The third variation that's good to have is just a full AoE sort of setup. This is completely apart from anything else, and you wouldn't use it in a boss fight. So basically, what you would be running is you'd be using Perfect Loak, Head Shoulders Jewelry. It doesn't have to be Perfect Loak, like I said. You could use something like Briarheart. That's just as good. Well, not just as good, but it's okay. On your body, you want Zogvin. Zogvin is the king of trash fight sets. It gives you pen, it gives you a butt ton of crit, and it gives you minor force, which is crazy. It allows you to do so much with your skills because it gives you all three of those bonuses. For your front bar weapon, you want the Master's 2H. You could use a sword or a maul. Personally, my preference is the battle axe because you get to proc bleeds on everything that you're hitting with this cone. You want it to be precise as well. The thing about the Masters set bonus is what it's going to do. It's going to increase the amount of damage that Cleave. We're going to be using Brawler, but that's just a morph of it. The base skill being Cleave. It increases the direct damage from Cleave up to 9,000 per hit, depending on how many things you're hitting at once. That set bonus is absolutely crazy in trash fights, and it's definitely something that you want to get your hands on. You don't necessarily have to run a Master's Battle Axe either. That's just the best in slot thing to do. You could use any other 2H, as long as it's precise, and preferentially, probably the better 2Hs to run if you don't have a Master's Battle Axe are ones that give you penetration on the one piece. I don't actually know whether there's any sets that do that, but anything like weapon damage, um, pen, crit, any of that's fine. Same thing goes for your back bar. We're going to be using the Maelstrom's bow again. It's just super strong with Endless Hail. But again, if you don't have it, just make sure you have an infused Berserker enchant bow, and that should be fine. In terms of skills, our front bar is going to look different again. So what you're going to want is you want Camo Hunter, Brawler, Debt Siphon, Executioner, but not necessarily Executioner. The thing about this AoE setup is it's intended to be used with 2H, and therefore you should be using Reverse Slice. So what Reverse Slice is essentially just an AoE Execute. It's just an AoE Execute version of Executioner. But the reason I don't have it on is because personally I like to run dual wield in trash, but that's just personal preference. If you really want to min-max your AoE damage, you would be using Reverse Slice and Brawler. So you would be brawling pretty much until anything's an execute, and then you would hit Reverse Slice, and that is going to clap. The purpose of Blast Bones and Debt Siphon is not necessarily to use Blast Bones for damage, but more so just to have a corpse that you can use for Debt Siphon. Again, we're going to have Pestilent Colossus on your front bar. We've got 3 Gravelord abilities. That's going to give us 30% extra crit. And with this setup specifically, that's going to put you almost on 100% crit when fully buffed. So it's just, yeah, any more and you would definitely be over-critting. Again, the back bar is slightly different. We're going to be having Debt Siphon in our Fighters Guild flex spot, and we're going to be having something called Mortal Coil in our Debt Siphon spot. The thing that Mortal Coil does is it's essentially just a healing version of Debt Siphon. It's going to do a similar animation where it kind of tethers you between the corpse that you've used it on and yourself. What this does is it's going to restore stam over time. And the thing about this build, this particular setup, is that Brawler, once you start spamming it, is going to cost a lot of stamina, and you won't be able to sustain unless you're heavy attacking or using something like Consuming Soul Trap. The reason I like Mortal Coil is that because you're in a trash fight, there's going to be corpses everywhere, and you can just cast this on any of those corpses. And like Debt Siphon, it's also off cooldown, so you can use it at any time. Doesn't matter. Everything else, though, staying exactly the same. So, the fourth and final variation that I want to show is the Bobo variation. So, this setup right here is really intended for Portal on VSS, so I'll just adjust what gear I'm using. So, in this case, if we wanted to be Bobo, we just wanted just range, high damage at range, and you just wanted to play your Necro. What we would do is that optimally we would be again in Perforelli and Locustes. If you don't have either of these sets, you again replace Locustes with Briar Heart, and you want either non-perfected Reliquin, or you want something like Zogvin or Hunting's Rage, or New Moon Acolyte, honestly. The only problem with the New Moon Acolyte being is that the sustain on this particular setup is already bad as is. It's only going to be worse with New Moon Acolyte. In terms of your weapons, you want a precise master's bow on your front bar. This is actually really important to the build, so you can't get away without having it. Just get some friends together, go into DSA. It's not the hardest thing in the world. It takes a while, but again, it's something that you really need. Maelstrom's bow, not as important, but again, super good to have. Replace it with an agility bow or whatever if you can't, as long as the enchant stays the same. I don't have any poisons equipped right now, but like with all of the other builds, the enchant on the front bar doesn't matter as long as the trait is correct. In which case, again, is precise. So front bar wise, we're going to be running Camo Hunter, Lethal Arrow, Det Siphon, Poison Injection, Blast Bones, Colossus. On the back bar, we've got 2 flex slots here. So I just have Vigor and Elude because it's my VSS hard mode portal setup. But you also want Skeletal Archer, Hail, Colossus. And the thing about Channeled Excel is, again, was for portal, so I needed a little bit more mobility and sort of distance in my build, so I was using this. But if you're just straight up passing something that's in front of you, just whack on Beast Trap does the same thing. Rotation wise, the same principle that applies to the normal 2H or dual wield rotation is exactly the same. You use Blast Bones and then you use 2 abilities. The only thing about this particular build is that our spammable is going to be Lethal Arrow. And the thing about Lethal Arrow is it's got a really weird cast time. So it's not going to line up perfectly with Blast Bones. Or any of your other dots for that matter. So if your rotation gets a little bit out of whack, that's fine. It's to be expected. But to demonstrate quickly, the rotation is basically fully dynamic. And the problem with it is that you can't get around it being fully dynamic. It's just the nature of the dots and their timing, as well as the fact that you need to keep up Lethal Arrow because it's a really strong buff. But if you can, for the most part, sort of manage to use Blast Bones every second ability, you'll be fine. But most importantly, the most important dot to keep up is your Poison Injection. The second most important is Beast Trap. And then after that, it's Hail, Archer, and so on and so forth. So, this build, the damage that it pulls on Bobo is probably comparable to like top mag right now. But at the same time, if you're really in a trial that requires you to be range, the survivability on Necro is not fantastic, so it's not recommended that you go to Bobo Necro if you can help it. Mag classes certainly perform better in things like Vast and Cloud Rest, so it's a preferable thing to have. Let's see, am I missing anything? I don't think so. Well, now that's all sorted, we'll go into a Parse so you guys can see the build in action, and I'll get back to you soon. Later. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope the build video helped you guys out. If you've got any questions about it, feel free just to ping me in Discord, ask away. I'm available all the time to help out. I know the explanation of the rotation was a little bit all over the place, but yeah, if you're having any troubles, having like a hard time following along with everything that I've said, just let me know. See ya.